welcome back to Fans of Fandom, the Dark Ages of DC. This is where we do a deep dive into particularly emotionally traumatic stories from the late 80s, early 90s so far in DC. I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann, social psychologist and full-time nerd, and is my co-host, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr.
Well, hello. Victor Dandridge, the hardest working man in comics here, self-publishing writer through Vantage and House Productions, and phenomenological narratologist through You Create Comics. I've actually decided I'm going to make a t-shirt that phonetically says phenomenological narratologist so that people can be like, oh, that's how you say that thing. Yeah, I'm going to need that.
Excellent. So in this current series, we are doing a deep dive into the Funeral for a Friend storyline. And so our special guest for this particular portion of the arc is grief specialist, Dr. Brittani Oliver Sillas Navarro. Brittani, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a grief researcher out in San Diego. I specialize with transitional age youth, so 16 to 25. And like the doctor said, I am a grief researcher, and I'm so excited to be here and like to talk about sad things, as usual.
It's the joy of which you said that. I like to talk about sad things. Yay!
It's the best.
I love it.
Doctor, we are pleased to have you.
Absolutely.
And since we are talking about sad things, I usually say this, I post this in the comments as well. But there are, if something comes up during this conversation that triggers you, makes you think about something you want to talk to someone about, please do call 988. That's the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline. Also, if you go to Psychology Today's website, they have a nice handy little tool where you can type in your zip code and find out all the therapists near you, what their specialties are they in person or virtual, and what insurance they take, which is sadly also important. So those are resources that you have. Please do avail yourself of them. Let's take a quick pause and see what's going on somewhere else in the DCU in Gotham City. Because as we described, there is not a lot of reference to this, earth-shaking event. But there was, so those previous issues that I showed you happened in February of '93. And around that time, DC was building up to another shakeup in another one of their key books, which we will talk about someday. But is in Batman 489, which was also in February, you had this real quick moment. Well, first, actually, before the moment, in the back, they also had an advertisement for World Without a Superman. So again, they're sort of inserting the advertisements because they assume people reading Batman, they're probably reading Superman too, because at this time they were about neck and neck on the Diamond list. But you also had Robin here.
Oh,
wow. Talking with Jean-Paul Valley, who was a relatively new addition to the Batman cast at that time. It was introduced, I think, earlier. I think it was in the summer, shortly before Death of Superman, when they did Sword of Azrael. So Jean-Paul Valley is known as a character named Azrael, an avenging angel, who, short answer, had been brainwashed since he was a child to work for the secret organization to kill people they wanted to take out. He was able to break free of that with Batman's help, and Batman sort of took him under his wing and under his cowl eventually, under his cape. There we go.
There you go.
To help sort of train him to deal with the sort of psychological trauma that he underwent and figure out how to use his skills appropriately. And so we have this moment here where Batman is starting to reach exhaustion. So we don't really see a whole lot of that when he shows up in the Superman issues, but what's going on at that time is he's about to reach his psychological and physical breaking point. And so what they do in this issue is Robin's going to take Azrael out actually dressed up as Batman, because Batman just can't go out. And so they're teasing a little bit what's going to happen within a year or so of this story. But all we get right here, why I pulled it out here, is notice that they're wearing the armbands.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, that may be one of the only other references to the armband outside of Funeral for a Friend. So not a
think you're
major
right.
story point. They don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's just there. Yeah.
It's one of those things like little Easter eggs that creators might have put in, and maybe it was a thing, maybe it wasn't a thing, right? Like how often does this maintain? Like, do you see it throughout the whole issue or in this moment?
I think it's just in this moment.
Okay,
I'd have to look, but I don't think I have the issue before or after this.
gotcha.
So now I may have to go on a quest. To
Oops,
see,
oops, sorry.
You PayPal me the money.
I gotcha.
So
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome.
So back to our regularly scheduled narrative. What I've got here is part 5. I just want to kind of put the cover up because the real action happens in part 6. Part 5 is where they first discover that Superman's body has been taken because we learn that Lex Luthor has installed a security system in there, um, which he has to kind of try to figure out a way to describe or to explain whether or not we believe him or not, but Supergirl does. He says it's like, well, yeah, I owned the property beforehand, so it was just installed in there before I repurposed it for Superman's tomb. Maybe he's lying, maybe not. Regardless, that's what moves the action forward. And so she then moves into the tunnels to try and figure out where his body is. More action ensues, and we get a pause. So that's what happens in that issue. Why I pulled this is to do 2 things. One, I want to talk about what we see in the cover, and then what we see in the letters page. So the cover, we have the focus is now his eternal flame and his statue. Right? So Superman has been buried. We had there at the end, Lana, Lois, and the Kents have now all been able to be physically present to say their goodbyes. All right. As Victor noted, we're now getting back to a regular story. Perhaps we could say life is still lifing. More money for Brittany. But then you have in the letters page, at the end of every letters page, there's always these sort of like teasers of what's going to happen. Sometimes they're a little, nondescript. Sometimes they're very detailed. And we get this here talking about what's coming in. Okay, more character development with the Kents. We sense that something, Pa's darkest hour of his life is going to be coming. So something bad's going to happen with Pa. And then we get there at the bottom. What do you make of that?
The ultimate tease. Like, no, there is no information at this time. That is a sentiment, number one, that as a significant issue, number 500, this is going to be a game changer and one of the best marketing feints in retrospect ever. Because simply put, at the time, with Superman 500 being the numbering, and them not saying anything in particular about what's supposed to happen, the immediate idea is, oh, he comes back in that issue. Easily. Like, oh, this is the return of Superman. Like right here. Like obviously it's a Hallmark issue 500, like without question, Superman's coming back. Boom. Like that thing was dope. It was fun, but it's over now. It's over. In a month, we'll see. Like it's about to be over.
And since the announcement, right, of the death, they were very clear that no, this is not just some ploy to bring him back quickly, right? He's dying, and we're gonna see what happens afterwards. And they even say, I think as they got closer, there's no reason to say there won't be a Superman, but it doesn't have to be Clark Kent.
No,
right? I mean, we talked about that when we showed the Action Comics riff with Supergirl, right? And as they go forward in this, there seems to be that suggestion that she will carry on the mantle.
Right.
But they also talked about at the time, well, books had been canceled. books that weren't selling particularly well, and Superman was selling healthy but not huge.
Right.
So even Carlin was a little bit coy and said, I don't know, maybe we're going to cancel it. And that's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
Wonder Woman had been canceled before. Batman had not, and Superman had not. But the other part of the DC Trinity had them. So, then I guess riffing on that, we now have Supergirl front and center. And I don't know if they planned this. I'd like to think they do. That can be headcanon. But when I saw these two next to each other, I'm like, it's almost the exact same pose. The framing is slightly different, right? You've got this wide open daytime, and here she's sort of centered and going into the tomb. But I don't know. I really liked that. I'll call it a graphic match. What the hell?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are continuations. It's almost as though the Supergirl in Action Comics is the next part. Like, she's actually moving, where Superman is a static statue captured in whatever element that is, and that's just what he is. She is now continuing that action. The bird has flown off her hand. Instead of the hand being on the hip, she's moving because she's getting ready to step into a situation which is the true world without Superman. It is now her who is the most powerful. It is her who is going to carry the S shield and make it make sense and make it matter. And the thing that makes it so beautiful in that context is, one, it's a statement of her capability, but also her aim, because she's not actually Kryptonian in the way that he is. She is not his cousin in the way that Kara Zor-El has ever been portrayed. This is something else, someone truly taking on the mantle and stepping into that position. And the fact that it's identifying as a female character, I think, is very, very powerful, especially in hindsight of knowing what's to come, that it takes 4 guys to potentially replace the true Superman. But here, this one Supergirl aims to step into it, and no argument. Like, that's not like, when you see this, people are like, well, she can't do that. No, there's no argument to her doing this, because there's no reason to doubt her.
And we've talked about this before. She's not a carbon copy.
No, not at all.
She has some similar powers, but she has some unique powers of her own that come to bear, like her psychic blasts, or she can turn invisible, right? And we'll see those things play out as they go forward. Let's see. Anything? Sorry, I couldn't remember if I had something else on the screen or not. Brittany, anything you want to weigh in on before we move?
And we talked about marketing months ago. So I wanted to go back to this
We can
idea.
revisit. It's been months for the audience too.
Oh, months ago. I was thinking about the like, in 1 month. It was like, this is like, that's the best version of a YouTube spoiler trailer. Like, as if something just like popped up like one word, and then it was like June 25th, 2025. Like, that's all you see, and you're like, oh, I gotta watch this show. I gotta watch this. What is this about? And so again, like Victor was saying, it's brilliant. Just brilliant in the placement. And then I was just, and this isn't really like a point by any means, but I was just thinking again about just Western culture and tombs and grave sites, and this idea of what it means to like desecrate a body. And again, just thinking out loud, it's not really a point, but what does it mean if the body was stolen? What does it affect people? Does it matter if it's still in there? Do we still have the same desire? Like, there's just something about this personhood of this inanimate object at this point. If that makes sense.
If I may,
yeah,
collaborate with you there. Almost a sacredness, perhaps.
Yeah. Something to the extent of being like, it's very, again, it gives the opportunity for ritualistic things, similar to the Christmas cards, right? So like, I'm a person who visits my parents' grave sites, my brother's, like, every year. And I don't know how I would feel if it was absent. Like, because I mean, for the most part in Western world, it's either cremation or burial. There are some other options, but for the most part, those two things. And it's interesting to think about just what the world would look like either way. So like what if he got cremated? Like what would that make a difference? Like who would get it? um and again, this is just word vomit, has nothing to do, no relevant point. I was just thinking about,
Yeah.
huh.
Although
It begs the story to like, now there's this idea of this like investigative mystery
yeah.
opportunity in comics, right? Like we got to figure who the bad guys are for this one specific thing about specifically linked to grief and loss. But could it have been a different story? Did it need to be this type of story in order for, for it to sell?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there. But regardless of cremation versus burial, and with cremation, what does one do with the ashes, right? And there are various rituals around that. Across the board, there's just there seems to be, most research suggests, pan-culturally there is this reverence for death.
Right.
It's experienced, or it's executed in different ways. How one handles the concept of remains, etc. But having a place, right? So like family altars, right? In other countries, right? That whether there are ashes there or not, there are reminders. There is something physical that one can be in a space and talk to that person, whether they feel like it's metaphorical or if they actually believe that it is a crossing of the void. All of that is this cultural nuance. In this case, though, not only is the body not there, right? It was stolen,
Right.
right? So it's not like one could say like, well, if one has the loved one cremated and then disperses the ashes in the ocean, the air, something like that. That's still a ritual, a choice, one that presumably involves the final wishes of the deceased, right? So this is like going back to that word sacred. I can only think this is desecration.
Right. That's why I'm just
yeah.
I think when it comes to this whole idea with it being Superman, especially, it's a continuation of the impossibility. It's impossible that Superman was going to die. No one thought that that was a thing in terms of the context of the story of these characters. Like they're like, no, Superman can't die. Superman doesn't die. And then, well, okay, he did die. Okay, that's unfortunate. But no one would ever steal his body. Like, who would do such a wait? What? It's stolen. Like, it's a continuation of the stakes being driven in a way of impossibility, and really kind of looking at a storytelling thing that almost takes absurdity and makes it reality, to see how the characters that you are telling stories about and with and through react to that absurdity. It becomes something that, again, at the core, this is why we love comics, because they take these things that would be openly devastating for any one thing to happen to anyone and do this to the same people over and over and over and over and over again. And we tune in almost as this cathartic way of dealing with our own fears and worries about these things happening in a fictional space, to someone who theoretically can take it because they're not real, but still have real reactions to those happenings occurring. So it's kind of this beautiful sort of thing of just ratcheting right back up emotional stakes in this very fictional space, for the sake of having great stories that kind of teach us survival instincts or survival information about what we would do in that situation that is still almost absurdly impossible. The likelihood of us dealing with this is so slim, but not zero. Let's discuss, if this thing were to happen and then it gets worse and then it gets worse, how do you deal? How do you deal with this? What is the right answer?
Well, and then I was thinking about like, just for the culture, I was thinking about like Tupac. He's not in there.
Come on now. Come on now.
And like this idea of like resurrection, if you're like a person of faith, it's like, okay, they're not in there. Like maybe it wasn't stolen. That goes back to the, like, in 1 month, like we're actually going to find out he was never dead in the first place and he's somewhere else. Like it's this belief and hope that I'm going to hold out on something because perhaps something that I want to be true is. And I think this idea of like ignorance is bliss, but at the same time, this ignorance can be joy. Like
Well,
I like I can turn this manifestation of anxiety
mhm,
that's potentially negative to something better is coming. And is that not the exact experience that we have thinking about the afterlife? Like, here's this thing that I hope can possibly be true. I say we as the metaphorical we,
right, right.
because I understand everyone has different faiths and
Mhm.
follows different policies, but like, here's this like maybe it's not real.
Mhm.
Maybe it was never real. Maybe this was just like this great spoiler, this great trip they were gonna take us through just for the sake of doing it because it made us excited and it gives me hope somewhere else.
And
Tupac.
they play that out here
Just kidding.
with these moments where, like, for example, Supergirl's like, oh wait, maybe at least this was in issue 5, I think,
Mhm.
where she's like, maybe he hired someone to resurrect him because the
Yeah.
hole was broken out, or no, it was broken in. The hole was
Broken
broken,
in. Yeah.
and the coffin is gone, and so that's when Lex Luthor's like, why would he take his coffin? And she's like, well, maybe he made plans to be resurrected, right? And so there is that hope here, and then in 500 we'll see things play out a slightly different way,
Hmm.
and then this issue of religion, of belief, becomes front and center for some people
Yes.
who did deify Superman, and
Mhm.
I'll pause on that. Wait in anticipation for that, dear viewers, for another few episodes.
Yes, yes.
Um, so Supergirl this time does make it all the way to Cadmus, um, uh, and well, actually, I'm sorry, this is going on slightly differently. Here's where we fast forward to Cadmus, right? And not everybody at Cadmus knew what Westfield was doing.
Mhm.
He kept it very, very close to the chest, as we'll see why. When Guardian, who's centered there, breaks in, they figure out why this wing has been sealed off. All right, and he's like, okay, Westfield's up to something, and it can't be good. They come in there, and Victor and I know we've talked about this before, but these are the last two panels on the page. I zoomed in on them, right? And this is the right page, so you have to turn,
Mhm.
right? So the last panel that you see is them going, "Oh my God, it's as bad as everybody feared." So we see this reaction shot. What is it? We flip to
Ridiculousness.
this double page spread,
That's right.
which blew my mind as a kid. Like,
Bold. Bold.
right.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, like, I see this. And I knew from the fourth issue that they had taken his body, but I did not expect this cold, clinical, like, I thought it then, and then I read it. He calls Westfield a ghoul, right?
Mhm.
It seems very ghoulish,
Mhm.
um, to have not only taken this hero and loved one's body that many of them all feel emotional connection to, but to have the body just kind of out there and being experimented on. Um, yeah.
If I may jump in, as a sign of the times, this is still early 90s, right? Can you imagine how dank and dark this would have gone in the early aughts to now category? I mean, we're talking, this is pre, and this, for context for people to understand, this is before a series like The Boys. This is before The Authority. This is before all of those titles, which take the superhero genre and ratchet it up to almost obscene levels for shock and awe purposes.
Mm.
What this would have looked like if done in a later era. We're
Mhm.
talking Superman would have been stripped down naked. There would have been parts of him already cut open, separated, like in some way, shape, or form. This is probably the cleanest version of this happening with the intent of going, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Knowing that within 10 years' time, 5 years' time to be fair, but literally in 10 years' time, what would have been necessary to shock us from this would have been the actual showcase of Superman's brain exposed, an eye in a jar, like something so horrific where you're like, I can't believe they actually did this.
Because it's either this issue or the previous one It might be this one where we do see Lex Luthor one's brain and eyes in a jar.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Because that's when we find out that they saved Lex Luthor's brain. And the whole idea here of the scale of desecration. Like this is still very safe. Like he's still wearing his uniform. Like at the very least, we pushed this to year 1999. He would have been stripped down naked. Maybe there would have been a cloth of some sort covering his person. But let the right writer do it. Mark Miller, I'm looking at you. Would have talked about how his genitalia is the key thing that how you know that he's not human. Like it would have been something crazy that would have been like, oh my gosh, like am I old enough to read this book? That is a very interesting point of view of how in the early 90s what we saw as shocking and almost traumatic even is such a lighter method than what we got later on, which I would argue, post 9/11, things that we thought were possible now become even more clear. I mean, not even just 9/11. We could go Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine, 9/11, those things back to back to back changed our perspective of what needed to be shocking visuals. This was enough in 93. But if this was told today, this is super tame to what we would have seen today. So I think that speaks to the innocence of where we were as readers, not even just as individuals, because we were younger, but as a general readership population. We were more innocent and didn't require that level of dastardly intentions to be shown to understand how dastardly the intentions are here on the page.
Well, like as soon as you said that, I was like,
reached the point where storytelling needed to be irredeemable.
Yes.
Sorry, Brittany.
Good job. That was a good one.
I was like, no, like this. It made me think. As soon as you were talking about that, Victor, I was like, I see this and I'm like, this is disgusting. One, and then two, it's like, man, we love a villain. Love one. It's like we love creating villains, like and making people just mad at somebody. And this is an example of that. However, as soon as you were talking about like the desensitization essentially of like this new culture, I was like, I the first episode of Gen V, like Jesus Christ.
Right? Right?
So categorically different than this. And yet I am a 35-year-old person like thinking like this is awful.
This is terrible.
Never printed this.
Oh my
This is
gosh.
terrible.
Oh my gosh. How very dare you? Yes, yes.
So I was like, that really resonates of just again, like is like who was this written for? Who's the intended audience? And who can like kind of read between the lines of like what was the desire of the creators in this moment, in this picture? How was it depicted? How was movement depicted in this for his stillness versus everyone else's movement? It's just it's so interesting that you brought that up because I didn't really think about that. And I'm like, yeah, this is real tame. We have fallen so far from grace.
Oh, we have. Like there would have been like bloody gauze all over the floor, and again, like different parts and pieces. We would have had like alien looking technology crawled upon his person and reading signals. Like this is super tame.
Yeah.
And I suppose the way they got away from that, perhaps narratively, is I think a page or so after this when Guardian's like, okay, fine. Because like Westfield's like, someone was gonna do it.
Yeah.
We've got it now. And so Guardian's like, okay, fine, but we're gonna do this
the right way.
The right way, whatever that is.
Right.
We can of course argue whether or not that was an ethical decision on Guardian's part, but that's a whole nother 3-hour conversation with beer. But they do try to use the scalpel on him. And it's his body is still invulnerable.
Also, I just have a question. What's up with the cape always like sometimes being tattered, sometimes not?
So my theory was
nerd out, please educate me.
Well, I think that was the one that was left with him in his grave, in the coffin.
Okay.
Not
a
brand new suit. Actually fought Doomsday with.
Yeah, it's a totally brand new suit. They buried him as Superman in refreshed clothes. Now, were they his level of costume fresh? I don't know. Maybe. Like it's possible. Reed Richards would have said unstable molecules, but that's a different universe. That's a little different. But yeah, I always took that as they redressed him for the burial. Now, thank goodness that they did it, right? Because I don't know, like there's something about the need to be like, oh no, Superman's got to be in full uniform when he is laid to rest. So underwear on the outside, let's put the belt, let's give him a cape. Even though he's gonna be laying on it, let's give him a cape. He's got to have the cape. Like that's some diehard fandom right there for whoever set that up, which would be Lex, because Lex secretly loves Superman. Let's be honest. So like I think there's that nerdy answer to it. It was a recreation for the perfect burial format.
Because I understand, like I can understand the outfit, like the suit being new and like new, but I kind of, I don't know. I'm going back and forth of like, should the cape have been?
I agree.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's parts of me that was like, it should have gone with him, but then there are parts of me that like it should have been like similar to the American flag that given to family members of lost soldiers. Like, I can go back and forth on like, there's something about it being buried with him that seems really poetic.
Wrong.
It seems really like beautiful, but simultaneously bad. And then there are parts of like, this seems fake and phony in some ways, of just like, oh, we're just gonna dress you up in the whatever. then put a suit on him. Just put some jeans and a t-shirt.
I think actually, so they don't really talk about what happened to the cape. I think Lois still has it.
Yeah, the tattered one.
As far as we know, she was the last person to be holding it.
Yeah.
So, which is appropriate. I think
Batman took it from her and then threw it off a building. Was like,
oh, there we go.
That's true,
Lois.
right? Take that.
Never actually happened, right?
Yeah, it's true. But I mean,
deep dive of what happened to it.
Brittany, you make a really great point though about the presentation of the cape or the preservation of the cape. Obviously, there's not a family member that necessarily can be presented to outside of, I would have assumed, Supergirl, that they would have given it the military fold like the flag and given it to Supergirl, and maybe I would have assumed that it would have been left as like a placard of some sort at the grave. So like maybe there's like a glass something or other, and it's folded up and it's there and you can see it. This cape in memorial to the greatest superhero of all time or something like that. But to bury it with him, I agree. Like you're like, no, that's kind of a flag, guys. You don't bury flags. Like that's inappropriate.
Well, we've already seen it. They've already made reference to it kind of like a flag.
Oh, and issue 75.
We'll see that in a few issues too.
Yeah.
It getting caught on, I mean, in all the iconography, it on like a stick and blowing in the wind. And I want to, I'll jump to the last page of action of this issue, because we move away from the drama there, and now we see Mon Pa Kent and Lana Lang going back home. Right, life's got to keep lifing. There's another one, Brittany.
It is.
And so I really like this moment here between her and Lana. Again, I mean, I don't know if they may have interacted at some point in time in a previous issue. But I mean, again, they both loved Clark romantically and platonically, in a different way now. But Lana even says this here where she's going to go get married. And it sort of just hits her then, oh, wait, I still have a husband or a fiance to go home to. She does not. Right. And I just love this moment between the two of them. This emotional support. I'll let you riff.
Well, the dynamic of two ladies who ever could have been seen, positioned, thought of as romantic rivals, embracing one another in support, that's already next level, right? That's the, it could have easily been, and bitch, don't you know, like it, but it's not that, right? It's no part of that energy whatsoever. Even as Lana laments, like, I had a thing for Clark so hard, and he never really kind of had it for me the same way. Like, oh my God, I really was into him. But that woman right there, she loved him. and he loved her back. I can't even imagine what that is. And maybe there's a level of maturity because her and Pete Ross are set to get married, and there's this whole thing that she's moved beyond with her relationship with Clark. But at the same time, how do you move on from loving Superman? You don't. Like, let's be honest. You know what I'm saying? Like, if the dude that you grew up with, you're like, yo, I really like forever and always, I'm yours. If Clark ever said like, Lana, let's give it a shot, and she's like, I'm with Pete. He's like, I said what I said. Would she be like, sorry, Pete? Like, it's Superman, right? Like, how do you really because we don't have any one person that truly impacts the world like Superman, right? Like, this is not just a celebrity. This is not just a superhero. He is a culture of significance, right? I mean, this is almost religious as a figure, and to get to know him on that personal level, where you are one of a handful, maybe five people in the entire world who know him like that, there is a level of love that you have that other people can't understand. And I love the idea of Lana recognizing that Lois's might actually be a bit higher, and understand that that might mean that her sadness and sorrow in the face of all this, not having known him nearly as long as Lana has, but you loved him different. You loved him deeper because of the way he loved you back. That is something that needs to be recognized. And I'm going to hug you. And I'm going to tell you once again, you aren't alone. No matter how much you might feel it right now, you might be singular in your experience, but you're not alone. And I'm here for you. Like, beautiful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm so glad, Victor, that you talked about just like as the lady speaking, just talking about female relationships are
Mhm.
just women presenting relationships. I it it's so important because like our like just for individuals who present as women or who identify as women, like our
Mhm.
lives are longer based off of other female relationships. It just is.
Mhm.
You guys are cool. Glad to have you in the world. But our relationships are truly grounded in seeing another person who understands how we understand because we feel differently. We just do biologically and hardwired to do so. And I do think that, and I want to tread carefully because I want to respect everybody. But it is important to understand that there is so much set aside in this moment of it doesn't matter.
Mhm. Mhm.
Love happened
Mhm.
and it resonated in different ways, but at the same time we're both hurting. We're hurting in different ways. And the context is really important that I get to go home. Again, tomorrow's gonna come. And so my tomorrow is going to look different than your tomorrow. Despite the fact that we're still going through something, I have someone to like cry on. I have a shoulder to lean on. I have people to help me, and there is aloneness for you, so I can respect that out of you. But I think that there takes enough emotional intelligence and security that I think we see in these two characters that's a little bit different than we see in some of the masculine characters.
Mhm.
Like they present as being able to be vulnerable at times and then feel the need to step up or to overpower in some ways or to be brave in a lot of situations. But I think in this moment, we see the vulnerability and the earnestness of love and connection of two people that just happen to be female presenting or women. And I don't think that this exact moment would exist consistently throughout with two men. Like
True.
it took the whole series, we could still see this happening day like from page one to the last. I do not think this looks the same for other characters, page one to the last. Or we can at least believe it to be true. Like,
Mhm.
yes, life is complicated. Yes, there are situations in which, like you said, that's not man. Like, like there's cattiness and stuff, of course, but it's love through and through.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
again, I see you, you see me. And I think it's important for young people to see this relationship, and this is one I think is really good, regardless if whoever is reading it as a young human, to know that relationships can be difficult between people that you can potentially be seen as rivals. Relationships can be difficult with people that challenge you and that challenge your other relationships, yet you can still persevere and rebuild on someone that you don't love, and this, or love, or even like. And this not only affects like your real world, like your interpersonal relationships. This is like your work. You don't have to like everybody that you work with.
Well,
You know, like this is pervasive in so many different settings. It is a true setup of what do you do with a challenging relationship when you guys both experience something that's difficult? Because in the real world, regardless if it's work or school or family or friends, something like this could and probably will happen. And loss is loss. Like when we talk about grief, like it's not just the death of somebody this time it happens to be, but it is about death of a friend, Anna, death, the loss of a job, the loss of expectations, the loss of hope, which all of this encompasses. And this is a perfect example of, hey, young people, things might get hard, but there are people around you, regardless of the complex nature of your relationships.
To dive right back off of that too, this also is a showcase of there doesn't have to be a quote unquote right time as long as you get to it. She was literally leaving, and it was like Lois thinking again beyond herself, of wishing her like, hey, when you reschedule the wedding, let me know. I wanna come back, and I want to be a part of it. And Lana realizing like at that moment that she's getting ready to leave to go to her future husband, that Lois will never get that. She turns around. And the whole context of time that they've been together with the Kents and all that stuff, that hadn't been the subject of conversation because it wasn't Lana's realization yet. When it happened, she didn't go, well, I didn't say nothing this whole time. I guess I can't say. She stopped, turned around, and was like, hey, by the way, I just want you to know, like, this is how important he is to me. And because you were that important to him, I want you to know I'm here for you as well. Like, it doesn't have to be, oh well, I missed my shot. I didn't say it at the funeral. Oh well, or I didn't call him, the day that it happened. Oh well. When it hits you that it is authentic, right, and true, you can still do it.
Well, and this is why it's important for young people to look at it. Like this is an opportunity to say, this is a shot of no regrets.
Yes,
A potential life of no regrets. And could it have been emotionally, could it have fallen and by the wayside and both of them weren't ready?
Absolutely,
Possibly.
absolutely.
But they framed it in a way in which both of them were at least emotionally vulnerable and safe, and we've brought this word back, safe enough with each other to ignore the external stressors and just be present with one another and just be there for each other.
I love it. I love it. Look at the accomplishment, because before, when we saw Lois getting ready to cry, she was waiting to do so because she thought she was alone. They had an airport. They wide open.
Yay!
And not only is she crying openly, she's embracing someone else through their tears along with, come on, let's go.
And it's the last panel.
Yes.
Is zoom in on that, right? So I think that's telling. It's a callback to the earlier issue. I do real quick want to make a Vantage Universe plug. It's almost like you're suggesting, Victor, it's never too late.
It's never too late, baby. That's right. Coming to stores soon. Final 4 issue is being worked on right now. Just want to throw that out there. Thank you. But yeah, I think that is one of those big things to understand, especially for young people, because Brittany, you're hitting it spot on, because we are in such a immediate gratification era that people presume that you can miss an opportunity to emote because you weren't there when XYZ happened. No. I expect fully a year from now that people could find out about the passing of my mother and embrace me, because that's when they found out. And in that regard, it is still right on time because it's authentic and true. As long as you're not doing it for putting on airs, like if it's authentic and true when it happens, then that's the right time. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, whether that is in, you know, circling somebody in their grief or expressing your own. There is no wrong time when it's authentic and true. It is always right. Let it happen, and you will be better for it.
And I also think like just this kind of syncs up things of there are so many moments, there are so many brilliant moments of goodbyes that
Ooh.
aren't just about Superman, right?
Mhm.
That aren't just about funerals or aren't just about burial sites, are people walking away,
Mhm.
are is this airport scene, is
Mhm.
Batman saying goodbye to this previous life and this new journey that he's going to go on. There's so many goodbyes, and that I think that that is so lovely that it's just again a reminder that our life stages and life phases are going to ebb and flow and change, and
Mhm.
it's interwoven in a way that again nuance or people who are younger might not notice, but older people are able to see like,
Mhm.
oh, there's an evolution of the world every single day of my life, every single month of my life. There's a journey that I'm going to go through, and it's going to be filled with a lot of goodbyes. And sometimes it's goodbye forever, and sometimes it's see you later, and everything in between.
Mm. Mm.
And I mean, even if young people can't look at these things with the life experiences that older folks might have,
Sure.
like just thinking about this, I reread it every year or two, and I see it with new eyes every time. But I still remember that first time, and although I didn't get all of this, it's still scaffolding, right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
still witnessing, it's still seeing role models, which we've talked about before, and not just in this context, but other contexts, the power of fiction and having characters that you can identify with. Because you run those simulations, you see, oh, this is a different way of being.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm gonna quick. I think I have a pullout here. Yes, I do. I have a pullout from the again the letters page, and pretty much like before, we now see it ratcheting up one step closer. Now we know it's not just Pa Kent's darkest days. He's gonna come face to face with death.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's gonna yeah. And then in the 2 weeks, they say it again. Pa Kent's dying. So to readers, especially at this point in time, we think Superman is dead. We're like, I don't know, are they going to take Pa out too?
Rude.
Um, so, and then of course you get those last two. There's no Adventures of Superman, which was an iconic issue, as Victor mentioned, right? But that was also in the book Adventures.
Mhm.
Um, this one now says, oh, there's no information about action, right? Because Adventures, action, Man of Steel, regular Superman, these were all meant to come out once a week or once every 2 weeks, so you would get 4 books a month, right? That would tie in. Here now it's like, oh, it's not just 500, but we may
We're
not
not
have
saying
one
anything.
in after that, right? um, so they continue that forward, that marketing, the best is yet to come, or the worst, or whatever. Um,